Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Lazar, Curator of Academic Programming at the Hopkins Center. We are so excited to finally be kicking off our 21-22 season. The first show will be Fires of Varanasi, a dance performance by Ragamala Dance Company that the Hop has co-commissioned, and that has been years in the making. The company was here for a residency developing the work just before the pandemic, and we are so excited to finally be presenting the finished piece for the premiere of its proscenium theater version. Today's discussion is part of our new Big Move series, in which we bring together dancers and choreographers with interdisciplinary scholars to delve into the intersections between dance and other fields of study. It's all part of integrating the arts into our campus and into our academic community, which is key to our role here at Dartmouth. So today we have Ragamala's co-artistic directors, Rani and Aparna Ramaswamy, in conversation with religion professor Sarah Swenson, who specializes in religion in Southeast Asia, as well as gender and sexuality, among other things. Before passing it over to them, here's a 2-minute trailer for the dance performance in order to give some context for their discussion.
Gange, 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 Ganga, 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 Gange, 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 Ganga, Ganga, Gange.
Hello. I'm so glad to be having this conversation with you, Rani and Aparna. I'm really fascinated by some of the religious themes that are present in your performance. In my discipline of religious studies, we explore questions in terms like, what is a religion, or what makes something religious? Speaking of the etymology of the term religion, the root of that word comes from Latin, religare, which means to bind or to tie something together. So the lig in religion is also the lig that's in a word like ligament. At the base of that definition is the possibility that religion could really be anything. Anything that binds us to this world, to our families, to our sense of purpose, or to our life philosophies. Among these popular and historical definitions, some might see religion as any relationship that binds us to sacred places, objects, or divine beings. This, of course, raises further questions like, well, what is divinity? Or who has divinity? How do we interact with divinity? What are gods? Are they omniscient, benevolent, immortal beings? Or are they mortal and morally complex? Can we persuade them or change them in the ways that they also change us? Either way, Do gods and divine beings depend on worship, or do they need support from other beings to continue in their roles as gods? These are all some of the questions that I get to explore in my role as a religion professor. Another major scholar who works in comparative religion, Kimberly Patton, wrote a book called Religion of the Gods in 2009 that does a cross-cultural analysis of different forms of art that points out that globally there's a number of traditions where gods are shown doing rituals and sacrifices to one another and to themselves. So this also raises questions like, are ritual and sacrifice essential parts of what make gods gods, just as much as they are part of what make us human? So this brings me to the question for the two of you, how do you relate to divinity in your dance performances? In that sense, can divinity be something that's acquired or shared as you understand it?
So, first of all, I want to say, Sarah, that we're so happy to be here in conversation with you. And thank you, Samantha, and the whole team at Dartmouth and the Hopkins Center for inviting us and supporting this project in such a sustained way. We are so happy to actually be bringing the work there live, and that this conversation can be part of our process. So going back, Sarah, to what you're talking about, you bring up so many fascinating points. And of course, all of them really make us think about how religion is such a vibrant, living, evolving topic for all of us that lives within each of us. And your question about divinity and dance and as dancers, I think what I can do is, for those who may not be as familiar with our form, I can talk about divinity in our form, Bharatanatyam, and give a little bit of background and context to that. So our form, Bharatanatyam, has its origins in Hindu mythology that are said to go back 2 millennia. And it is said that dance was created by the gods for the enjoyment of the masses, and that they took 4 elements, each from one Veda or sacred text. We're talking about words, song, gesture, and sentiment to come together to create the 5th sacred scripture, or the Natya Veda, which means dance. And so dance, as it was created as just one form, it was shared throughout the country as movement, as story, but always traveled through the practitioners. It was an oral tradition and remains an oral tradition, and that is a very important part of our process and the process of the form as well. But as it traveled through the country, it absorbed the nuances of each region. And Bharatanatyam is from the region of Southeast India, or Tamil Nadu, the state that we are from and our family is from. And so for centuries, it was performed by women as part of ritual and worship in the temples. So its home was in the temples. Its origins were spiritual. So you can see where I'm going with this through line of divinity and Bharatanatyam being absolutely inseparable. And the purpose of the dancer was not at all to be an entertainer, but rather a medium between the viewers and God. It was her job to transport the audience so we could all together share a space of wonder and bliss. And so that feels like something that is quite a responsibility and an honor. And I'll have Rani kind of take it from there and see what you have to add.
Yeah. I thought, when you become a dancer, when you start training in dance, it's not that you're going to learn the religion or divinity through the Vedas or through the emotion, the gestures, or the movement. Now, because it's an Indian art form, it is a Hindu art form. So those who are practitioners are also Hindus by birth and by practice. So Hinduism is a religion that From birth to death is filled with rituals. And Hinduism is believed to be a creative religion, which is you can look at a stone and say, this is my God. You can look at a tree and say, I'm going to worship this tree. This tree is my God. So there is no limit. Everything is created by God. Everything you see is God. You can go into a temple and worship God. You could be at home and have all of us have a little altar and we worship there. Or you can, when you step on a piece of paper, you say sorry because that is the goddess of education. So everything, there is divinity in everything. So dance becomes another vehicle for expressing divinity. So for a person who's not a Hindu, who's not familiar with this religion, who is becoming a dancer, it takes a little bit, 10 steps more to get into that than a person who has been initiated into this religion. Does that make sense? Because when we dance, the goal of every dancer is to seek union with the divine. And that union, that song can be, if a person is talking about love towards a man, that man represents God. So everything is tied into a spiritual knot.
I love that relates back to that whole definition of religion as religare, that which binds us or that which ties us to each other, to the sacred world around us, or to divinities. We'll come back to some of deeper discussion about dance as a form of self-disciplining practice or a form of being in relationship with divinities. But I wanted to ask, among the divinities that are central to your performance is the Hindu figure of Shiva. Can you tell us more about him?
Sure, yeah, I can start. So, as you say, Shiva is one of the major deities in the Hindu pantheon. And he is known in his many forms, and through his many forms, to dance the world into existence, destruction, and regeneration. And so his dance is called the Tandava, and he has many different Tandavas. The Ananda Tandava, which is the dance of bliss, the state of forgetting oneself, is a very popular one to convey through dance. But there's also the Rudra Tandava, the dance of destruction, the Sandhya Tandava, the one he does in the evening. So each dance, which is the cosmic movement of humanity, happens for a different reason and at a different and specific time. And so he is portrayed, and many of our guests today or viewers who are joining us may have seen different Shiva statues, but I can talk about some of his, the attributes and the symbolic meaning of those attributes. Oftentimes he is shown with the damuru, or to go to the right, opposite with the thing. Oh, here, the damuru, which is the rattle drum, the drum which summons everything into creation. In his left hand, he holds the Agni, or the fire which destroys everything that the drum has created. In his other hand, he blesses those who follow him or follow his path. The lower hand points to his uplifted leg, which signifies spiritual contemplation. With his right foot, he stands on top of a demon, which symbolizes the ego and ignorance, which we must all minimize. Around his neck, he wears a cobra, which represents our Hindu belief in reincarnation and continuity, or the cyclical nature of time. Nestled in his hair is the constellation, the planets, the stars, the crescent moon, and also the goddess Ganga, who he captures in his hair to control her outrageous flow from the heavens to the earth. And his long hair, his tresses, fly out across space and they touch the edge of the universe. His face and his expression is one of cosmic balance. And finally, we see his third eye open. Through this, he sees wisdom and destroys the world of illusion. So there are so many different symbols, and the metaphysical conversations we can have are myriad, of course. But this just gives an idea of how he is holistic in his power, and how it is our, I think, a responsibility, I'm not sure what, but our role to minimize our ego in his presence.
Well, Parna, as you're describing some of that symbolism and moving through the hand motions, I can see so many links and ways that your dance relates to even the way that you talk about and describe this divinity figure. So this might be a good chance to show the clip that you sent, which not only has a clear show of you incorporating those gestures and movements into dance, but also of several of the statues and depictions of Shiva. So in my class this quarter, Religion 111, Sisters, Sages, and Seekers, we discuss a concept of asceticism, which we define as the practice of self-discipline to cultivate spiritual transformation. The word asceticism comes from the Greek root word askesis, which is actually also part of the word for athlete. So just as athletes train themselves to become stronger, faster, masters of their sports, the same quality of discipline and practice applies to spiritual training in many forms. By that definition, would the two of you consider dance a form of asceticism?
Now, if we take Shiva as a symbol of dance, can I talk about him as an ascetic and a seeker? So Shiva is both the ascetic and the seeker. Because again, the cycle is you're not one or the other, you're both. And in the Hindu religion, there are 4 stages that a man must go through. One is birth, then bachelorhood, then marriage, householder, and then an ascetic. And this is how you gain by living a householder's life, by being a child, by being a bachelor, by being a husband, a father, and then an ascetic. You have experienced life in order to seek the higher, which is God. And in many mythological stories, Shiva is shown as both the ascetic, where he sits in the Himalayas and is meditating for thousands of years. And they bring in Parvati, his wife, who's the daughter of the mountain of the Himalayan mountain, who is in love with Shiva, and she asks Cupid to shoot his arrows at her. So she is also meditating to be married to Shiva for thousands of years. And then the Cupid strikes the arrow. Shiva wakes up and he sees it spring, and then he sees Parvati. They get married, and as householder, husband and wife seek a place to live, and that's where they find Varanasi, and that's where they settle down. But then there is the other part where his wife dies in a fire, like jumping into a fire. The story is too long. I'm not going to say it. She destroys a ritual by her father that does not respect Shiva because he's not a god like others. He's an ascetic. He lives in the funeral grounds. He does not wear jewelry. He wears a skull. So he doesn't get the respect that the other gods get. So his wife gets very upset and jumps into the fire, and she dies. So Shiva comes there, destroys this entire people who were the reason for his wife to die, and goes up and meditates again for thousands of years until Parvati is born again and she's united with her husband again. So it's a constant connection between life and death, living asceticism as well as seeking. But in dance, it is, as you say, it's a perfect way you said that the word for athleticism is asceticism. Because when you hear it, it sounds like you give up everything to be an ascetic. Actually, it is the discipline of not being wayward and staying true to oneself to master, whether it's an art form or whether it's an athletic action.
So another topic that we're exploring in my course this quarter is the idea of gender as a form of ascetic training or a form of self-discipline that people use to interface with religious groups or society. A major question of the course then becomes, how does social change occur? Turning this question back to you, Renee and Aparna, by engaging in dance, have women changed social norms?
Until the early 1900s, this dance was done in the temples of India by women who were known as Devadasis or servants of God. So the Devadasi was a community where families, I mean, we have seen families giving away their children to become nuns or fathers. In those days, families gave children to the temple to become doing service to the temple. So that became a community of men, boys, girls, men, women, who dedicated themselves to performing in the temples, singing in the temples, working in the temples, directly dealing with the deity and so on. And the main role of women was to perform, and men were musicians, dance teachers, and so on. And they were very highly trained. The highest trained dancers were sent to the largest temple, the most powerful temple. The temples were supported by the kings, and the kings and the temples supported the dancers. Now, they said that these women were so powerful because they had a salary when they were paid, they were paid for their work. They had a social status of being the court, not a court, but a temple dancer of a highly regarded temple. And when you compare with the normal housewives and women around, they never had that kind of a role in society or a status. They were not allowed to work. They were mostly at home, so they were wives. So at that time, their status was so high. But then during the British, when the British ruled India, the kingdoms disappeared. The kings were not able to support the temples were not able to support the dancers. And the British thought of having temple dancers as something that was not, they did not support the idea of this. So they actually came out of the temples to teach people that would not have studied in Bharatanatyam or any other dance style, because it was only allowed by a certain caste of women. But so their role changed from being these highly regarded, very powerful women to not having their social status changed because they were not even able to earn. They had to earn money by teaching other people. So actually the role of women in that, dancing women, reduced during the during the British period. And then now since after the independence, Bharatanatyam has taken off. It's the most popular art form in India, with thousands of dancers who have no opportunity to perform. So there was a renaissance of growth where housewives, young women, children are all learning dance, because that's the dance form that came from that particular region. So definitely, and now women, just like in the West, you have very famous ballet dancers, famous modern dancers. There are very famous classical Indian dancers who are so well respected, earn a lot of money, and have very high, respected position as women dancers in India now.
Thank you so much, Rani, for a compelling overlay of the history of dance as ritual and the effect that British colonialism had on imposing these separate categories of dance and ritual, and how that's affected the art form today. So pursuing that question further, could the two of you describe more what the difference is between dance and ritual as international performers? Are all dances still a form of ritual when performed on stage?
Bharatanatyam has a vocabulary that we study, but then just like we write a book, all ideas come from us. So not all productions are similar with only rituals or only spiritual or only sacred. We have several ways we can go with the performance, but I think I'm going to talk about rituals and how rituals are incorporated within the dance. And Hinduism, again, I have to go back to Hinduism because Indian dance is a Hindu art form. Now it's a religion of intricate and highly symbolic rituals. And there are several such, for example, visual rituals, which includes lamps, colors, textures, gestures, body postures and movements, which are done in front of the gods as a ritual, or if you watch Fires of Varanasi, you will see all this done through dance. Then we have auditory sensation, which is chants, music, gongs, bells, cymbals, drums, and musical instruments. Then we have olfactory, smell of incense and flowers and fragrance and camphor and so on. And then we have tactile experience, where you handle things, you're throwing flowers, you are mixing sandalwood paste. So all of these, plus sense of taste, which is providing food for the divine, to the gods. A lot of these are done by women in a household as ritual, because men usually take the role of sitting in front of the fire and with the priest evoking the gods, while women do all of this around to make this experience such an aesthetic, artistic experience that it provides a profound and joyous word called bhava, which is the expression, ecstatic feeling, because you're surrounded in a ritual by all of these things. So if you watch the Fires of Varanasi, which is an homage to the city as well as to Shiva, we do all these things but through gestures of Indian classical dance. So you see the sandalwood, mixing the sandalwood paste, smelling of camphor, offering flowers. All of these are ritualistically done, but stylistically done.
Even though we're creating contemporary work, our roots are ancient, and our primary focus, I would say, on the
presence of spirituality and divinity through Bharatanatyam as actually a source of agency is very important for us, and through all the works that we create. And I will use the example of a poetic movement that we had in India, a major poetic movement called the Bhakti movement, from the 6th century through the 18th century. And we say, and I think all art forms, this is true for all art forms, but for us, the interdependence of movement and music and poetry, spiritual thought and theater are really fascinating. It really becomes a multidimensional experience. And so when we talk about this poetic movement, really what was happening at the time is that people from all walks of life, from all parts of India, regardless of caste and economic status and gender, all of a sudden felt free to worship in the ways that they wanted to worship. They were not held back by the limits of the declarations of priests or the Sanskrit chants, but they were worshiping in their own local languages and in their own way, through song, through poetry, through dance. And so that agency of worshiping the sacred in any way that you felt most effective, and also to see the sacred as not just, as you said, how is God God? How does God remain God? So through this movement, what was really developed is God is your lover, God is your son, God is your daughter, God is your mother, God is your protector, God is your destroyer. And so that relationship becomes both intimate and infinite. And so in that time, we had poets and female poets and male poets who were embracing their gender, but they were expressing their love for the gods, for the sacred, through erotic poetry, showing their closeness. At the same time, there are other poets who were refusing their gender, and they were just in a single-minded pursuit of the soul for the divine. And so when you see this, as I say it, agency that has existed through centuries, we are in some ways the very fortunate beneficiaries of that tradition of agency. And while there is so much structure and history from where we come and in the art forms we come, there is this freedom in our creative spirit and in our creativity to communicate with audiences through this bhava rasa concept of expression and aesthetic pleasure and relish, but also our communication with the sacred.
Thank you for an incredibly beautiful description of dance as something that offers a source of agency that is also a kind of deeply sensual engagement and form of worship. As dancers, this makes me think of another kind of discussion we have often in religious studies about the nature of ritual, which is where a ritual has its boundaries. Who is part of the ritual and who is not part of the ritual? Thinking specifically of one theorist named Ronald Grimes, he proposes a theory of ritual criticism. So many people would define ritual as something that happens through tradition and repetition, doing something over and over again to create a set aside time or space, and the people who are part of that repetition are the ones who are engaging the ritual. Grimes makes the argument that actually there's just as much an important role played by those who sit outside and are not part of repeating the ritual, who make critiques and comments and feedback and interpret the ritual. So everybody that's sitting out in the audience watching and observing, and their comments such as like, oh, I thought it should be done this way, or I thought this was so beautiful, that in fact, that observation is a form of ritual participation. What are your thoughts on Grimes' theory and how audiences relate to ritual and worship in your dance performances?
It's a very interesting question. Now, we have rituals that are done to evoke the gods, whether it's done in the temples or it's done at home. There are rules, and you have to follow those rules in order to appease the gods. So, all the produce that you need for the ritual, how many priests you need for the ritual, all of that is set. The rituals that we do in dance is definitely, even though it's very sincerely done, does not follow rules. We use gestures. We don't have any produce, we don't have any fire. Everything is done through gestures and emotions to evoke the gods, because we want to reach to that level. But the gestures have all to be done correctly. They say gestures are the silent language with which humans communicate with the gods. So if we do wrong gestures, it might bring, bad things, or it will miscommunicate what you are trying to say. So even though the gestures are acted or done in dance, they are not exactly the same. They are more emotionally outbursts of reaching God than following rules and doing rituals a certain way that a priest would do. So when Aparna was talking about breaking gender and going with your feeling, that's what happened. A lot of people did not want to be tied to religion that was done by priests. They wanted direct communication with the gods. So they were trying to break this set of rules and go directly through poetry, music to reach God. So those are two kinds of rituals. And here, in a regular ritual, there are no audiences except people who are participating in the rituals. In a dance performance, there are audiences, and they will sometimes complain, saying, "Oh, how come they're showing Shiva like this? Why is it that they are showing fire with Drupataka instead of Katrimukh?" Knowledgeable artists. And of course, that is interesting, because if you understand and participate, it's definitely a participation in the rituals.
What you've said brings to mind another religion scholar, Donovan Schaefer, who focuses on the role of feelings in religious experience. So in stepping away from the sharp structures of ritual and invoking this creative space, it sounds like audiences are also invited to be part of a feeling of awe, and that feeling itself can be part of a spiritual experience invoked by dance for dancers and audiences alike.
Yeah, absolutely. That feeling of awe, wonder, of all of the feelings that humans feel is a responsibility of the dancer to evoke within the audience. So it is a shared participatory experience. That's how it was set up. That's how it continues to be. And that transcends not just our form, but to all artistic experiences, I would say. That we have a relationship that is spontaneous and in the current moment that is changing, that we're all part of. And you're absolutely correct, that is the ritual, but it is also, that is what makes us resilient and filled with joy as human beings.
So it seems like this conversation about the relationships between dancers and audiences and an invitation to be part of AWE is a great transition to conclude and say thank you for this discussion and to invite our audience here to come and be part of first the dance workshop that's occurring on Wednesday evening, September 15th, and both of your performances on Friday and Saturday, September 17th and 18th. With more details on the HOP website to be part of this experience and really get a full three-dimensional engagement with some of these subjects we've been talking about. So thank you so much, both of you, again.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Totally enjoyed speaking with you, and this was wonderful.